Caligula, written by myself. It goes like this. 1 month's miasma of enfevered suffering. The brain swells, each broken mirror shard of ego dazzling into azure eyelid stars. Each nerve its own road to Tartarus. The body goes white as sclera, and at a touch dances between clammy chill and hellish hot. Frankincense and myrrh mingle, haunting out from that black chamber. A thing stirs therein, and moans its fury. Scent of sweet perfume laid delicate atop the hog-thick raft of sweat shed out of a multitude. Shuffling forms turned all to flab long ago. Angry shafts of sunbeam pressed them inside the Curia Julia like a phalanx above. Once inside, the great men of those days congregated amongst each other as wasps copulating among the flowers. They hail each other, hurling pleasantries and promises from behind cover of their great broad smiles. Scribonius Proculus had recently, to the immense annoyance of his fellows, purchased a very fine ring with a gigantic center stone of deep purple amethysts ripped out the innards of Africa. So fine and grossly swollen was the amethyst stone that it was impossible for the eye to keep off it. Now that Proculus had, very suddenly, adopted a habit of describing all matters of heaven and earth with his left hand in particular. It was with the eye of Sentinius that the newly risen emperor surveilled those senators and his attendants. He was standing in the midst of them, where he would soon give out his expected address. As it was, the emperor was currently being assailed on either side by Betulinus Bassus and Lucius Annius Vinicius, who were working double time to curry favor. Bassus, very old and reedy, was practically drowning in his toga, as he loudly thanked the gods for the healthy return of his sweet emperor. He coughed then with sudden violence into a cloth of gold handkerchief, stared gravely at its contents, and returned with stiffness to his seat. Vinicius had more grace with it, smiling bright and telling clever jokes with a charm that had won over his stepbrother, Lepidus, and even the emperor himself for a time. Things were different now, however, after his awakening. With his new eyes he could see what's in a man, whether he wished to or not. He saw them clear, these senators with their togas of finest silk and cotton wrapped about their trunks and their loins, malignancies all in whites like dove tumus. Bassus had favored the too young. The emperor could see that now, perhaps had always seen it. Embedded there in the half-senile brain was a dark logic and street wit to procure those things which even satyrs deny. Vinicius was little better. There was such an acidic, poisonous ichor that filled the man's traitor soul that the emperor had, for a moment, believed that Sejanus walked again. He feared now for Lepidus, and even more still for poor Drusilla. He had to push the thought of those two out of his head for now. It hurt to think of them somehow. In truth, it had hurt to think of anyone anymore. Fleeting visions of goodness, pursued but never realized, meandered about his fresh-budded conscience and plummeted down into the private sorrow of his anemic heart. He saw now within people the lattice of their being, and the overflowing wellspring of potential never reached but never changed all to sewer instead. And even before his illness was he beginning to understand, to have the magical thoughts, those first subtle strummings of inner life beginning, after the chance thumbing through, of an old report come from a faraway province and written by a man that the emperor was unsure if he ought to embrace or have executed. He knew now that he had returned from the blackness that an awful metamorphosis had taken place within, and that he, Gaius, lived no longer among common men, but belonged now instead to something altogether great and incomprehensible. The emperor allowed the wit of Venetianus to flow over him all the while, sensing now, better than ever, the thinly veiled disdain that he used to mistake for good-humored ribbing, and outwardly, the emperor commanded his body to spasm out into smiles and chokes of laughter, but his always fevered, capri-sharpened eyes were watching and drinking in the sight of all the men around, all the men who had presumed that they could kill him without consequence. After some time, Venetianus took his seat, and all the other senators had too, and now it was only the emperor standing. A pair of slaves, small, skinny things, entered the curia and were attempting with unusual difficulty to drag in the evening sacrifice, a large pig. With frightful shrieks and eyes rolling with terror, the animal was dragged before the emperor. He figured the poor beast must somehow have had an idea of what was soon to occur. It was when one of the pair of slaves let go of the rope in order to present the ritual dagger to the emperor that the hog let out such a mournful wail of horror and despair that he, feeling pity, deigned to make a quick end of it. He took up the blade and brought it savagely down into the soft flesh of the throat, and laid it open with a single glide. The hot red essence gushed out as a geyser at Mount Vesuvius. Some of the stuff had sprayed a fine mist onto his toga, spattering it here and there with the memory of killing. He regarded the stains coolly, with a flick of the imperial eye. The pig struggled against the inevitable death that the emperor had forced into it for a few moments before the body, drained of strength, gently gave its acquiescence, and was hollowed now of pig spirit, sent up as savor to the gods. The emperor closed shut his lids, and knelt now amongst the gore, speaking sacred words, as one does in the temple. His voice filled the building, floating out with the sing-song melody of dream. The face contorted then, twisted with intense feeling, as one honored a triumph, or being crucified. When the ritual had finished, and the carcass was being taken away by the two tiny slaves, the emperor spied the eye of Bassus following the slaves as they went. Two beady black orbs afloat in the withered sockets, slowly trailing, glorying in the prepubescence. Proculus was watching now too, obscenely rubbing his ring. The two nobles met eyes across the Curia Julia in silent understanding. He looked out among the crowd quietly for a time, if only to fan the hate inside. The emperor exhaled, took a step forward, and opened his pale, thin lips to speak. "Esteemed men of Rome," he began, "I hope to find you all in good health. Good health being a thing which has, apparently," the emperor added dryly, "become a scarce commodity of late within the imperial family." It was only when following this ambiguous statement that the emperor allowed his face to form the good-humored smile he was famed for, that the Senate followed his lead, and allowed themselves to laugh very politely. "Men of Rome," he followed, turning serious, "I desired your congress that I might thank you sincerely for your earnest wishes and prayers for my vitality in return. I know some of you wished very earnestly indeed. He painted another smile on that gaunt white mask. I have heard that there have even been vows. He stepped to them now, closing in. Vows of a most sincere nature. Is that true, fathers? He had scarcely finished speaking before the larval arms of Publius Africanus Potitus wriggled out into the air. Darling Emperor, you who are like my own babe, the man cried out, quivering. In those horrid weeks in which we were deprived of you, the state of Rome has never known darker days. Darker, I declare. He was on his feet now, face red from exertion. Darker than the days of Carthage. There was a reluctant murmur of agreement. So miserable were we that the streets were lined, I'm sure you've been told, with those pure plebeians who dumped ash upon their heads, wrung their hands, and rent their clothes asunder. He made a great show of twisting and pulling at his toga, exposing the myriad coiled gray hairs that populated the chest like a legion of snails. It was during this time that I made a solemn and terrible oath, that should the gods above intervene on your behalf, our behalf, the behalf of Rome, so that you could wake and walk once more, I would give my life for yours. I've sworn to pound my house and name, Emperor. Tears were rolling down his face, and the man was now, ridiculously, pointing a pen to his own throat. I will follow through on this vow, master. In the name of the glorious Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus will I end myself here and now. For a moment, the emperor was genuinely stunned at what he was witnessing. The entire Senate House had at once devolved into an orgy of teary-eyed sentiment. Men fell over themselves to compete with the testimony of Potitus. To the arena, I swore, spoke one man. I have vowed to give away all my worldly wealth, said another. They have attempted my murder, the emperor thought, and they would have me reward them for it. He was held in a paralysis of anger, cocooned in the cold of it, and for some time could not speak. It was then that an amusing idea came to him. Potitus, my faithful servant, he called softly, hitting the target through the uproar. The room went quiet. Let that pen down. Come here. Come to me. The man did so gladly, relishing the prospect of being rewarded openly, and boosting his status, or his peers watched on in jealousy. Close now, standing near a crimson splatter, the emperor took in with his eyes the whole of the man called Publius Africanus Potitus. He was a bald, soft, and portly little chimera of evils who smelt pleasantly of nutmeg and cream. How well he has eaten, thought the emperor. He remembered his brother Drusus, who had been so desperately starved after the Senate voted his exile that he died eating the stuffing of his mattress. Good man, I see clearly by your conduct and demeanor that standing before me is a truly authentic specimen of the aristocracy. Your words have moved and even inspired me. Put out your hand, Publius. The man did so, with barely concealed eagerness, as does the pleb who finds himself first in the breadline. With duly noted revulsion, the emperor saw how the worm of the man's lip moistened at the prospect of being handed a banknote worth several million sesterces, for the emperor had a reputation of such open-handedness. The emperor produced from his blood-stained toga the sacrificial dagger, and plopped it heavily into the open mitt of Pubulus Africanus Potitus, whose eyes were now the size of eggs and whose face had drained all of color, and the Emperor of Rome grinned wide like a wolf. "You have made your vows to the gods, man. It is time to do that thing which you have promised." Potitus threw his head behind him back towards his fellows, eyes pleading. They sat now like a congregation of tight-lipped statues, each man struck as they were with his own little thunderbolt of terror. There would be no objections. The man fell to his knees, the legs seemingly losing all power like a newborn calf. He anointed the handle of the knife with the greasy oils of his shaking hands, frantically turning the blade this way and that, as if it were impossible for the brain to comprehend the object. He pleaded. Emperor! He was crashing, falling first into tears, real ones now, and then finally gasping, choking sobs. He let the dagger slip as he doubled over from the frightening violence of his own despair, and became prostrate, with his face full into pig's blood, his arms reaching weakly out like sightless gelatinous eels that eventually found purchase on the hems of the emperor's toga. Pubulus, the emperor began with folded hands and speaking plainly over the sobs. There is something in your manner that is telling me that you altogether have no intention of following through with your word. He pressed the edge of his sandal into the man's soft belly, and with a little exertion flipped him face up like some wretched starfish. The emperor knelt, picked up the discarded dagger, and leaned down close to his face. You have committed perjury. No! Shrieked Potitus, standing up all of a sudden. His face was now horror, covered as it was all with blood and twisted in agony and madness. I will do it. He laughed then, and too loudly and shivered like a man sick with sepsis. I only needed time, master. He was giddy, eyes darting every which way, then finally staying steady when they found the bloodied blade of the sacrificial dagger, and his fat lips twitched into a leer. Now, yes, now I will do as commanded. On my honor I shall. Only give me back the blade, sweet lord. His tongue darted out for a flash, wetted those awful lips, and I will give myself over to the gods. He stretched out his hand eagerly once more. Let the man, the emperor declared sonorously, wholly ignoring the red lunacy that was taking place in front of him. Address yourself. He who vowed to fight in the arena on my account, make himself known now, or I shall surely have him flogged later. It was I, one man called with calm, getting up from his seat. He was middle-aged, 40 perhaps, with light brown hair that was threaded through with silver in some places. He was very fit, having only recently been elevated to the senatorial class where he had previously been a knight. Address yourself. I am called Antonius Secundus, Caesar. If I said the word, the emperor asked slowly, would you follow through with your vow, and henceforth fight in the arena for the rest of your days? I am a simple creature, your majesty. He met the emperor's gaze. In my army days, when I held authority over men, I would tell one soldier, go, and he would go. And I would say to another, come, but he would come back to me. It is my nature to do as bidden. You were hoping for a reward, weren't you, Antonius Secundus? Yes, said Secundus, still not looking away. I confess I was hoping for some reward, Majesty. We all were. The emperor watched him quietly for some time, surprised at what he had heard. He was impressed of the honesty of this new man called Antonius Secundus. More so than that, though, he remarked upon his faith. "To arms, then, gladiator," said the emperor, breaking the silence as he tossed the dagger to Secundus, who caught it skillfully. He turned, facing back towards the panicked form of Potitus. "I have found your first opponent." Potitus wailed horribly and attempted to dash out the door then, but by his third stride was already caught and wrestled to the ground by Secundus, who was on him now like a lion at his catch. It was with the careless precision of a carpenter going at a nail that Secundus worked upon the fallen senator. The screams and pleas emerging from that pile of flesh only grew more garbled as the thing grew redder, and the holy blade shimmered there in the light as bright as it ever did. So total was the end of the creature once called Publius Africanus Potitus that when it was finished, a profane river had thus been created and was running out along the marble tiles towards the entryway of the Curia Julia and overflown the steps, fleeing still. Antonius Secundus approached the emperor. "It is done," said Secundus as he handed the dagger back to the emperor pommel first. "I see that." The emperor could not help smiling as he looked upon this man who was splattered now head to toe all with Potitus. He dug in his toga looking for something, realized he did not have it, and walked a few feet over to where the carcass of Potitus was and began rummaging through the dead man's toga for a few moments. Here we are," the emperor remarked with satisfaction when he pulled a pen free from Potitus's clothes. He took out a scrap of parchment, lazily scribbled on it, and went back to hand it off to Antonius Secundus, who made it disappear in his fists very quickly. "Your service is ended, my gladiator," said the emperor with some warmth. "And you've done well. Return to your seat, please." "Thank you, Lord," returned the murderer in a low voice choked with sincerity. He turned and did as was commanded. "What a wondrous thing it is," proclaimed the emperor to the pale white Congress, "that we live now in an age where men die worse than swine." He spied now in the corner of his vision flies settling already upon the corpse. Now, I do believe that there were quite a few more vows that were of a rather fantastical nature. Shall we entertain those as well, or is it better, perhaps, that we shift the topic of discussion, O sagacious leaders? He was met only by a profound quiet, held together in collaboration by some near 600 men. "Excellent. Then allow me to speak plainly, a thing seldom done in Rome. Please accept my apologies in advance, fathers, if my thoughts come across as somewhat scrambled and nonsensical. I have read that being poisoned can have a disastrous effect on the mind." The start of another massive clamor began at that, but was quickly quelled when the emperor pointed with silent meaning at the dead man near him. "Do not argue with me on this. It will not go over well. I know what you have done to me, villains." He flung his baleful eyes about the room, as though they could stone the men they landed upon. He regained composure after exhaling deeply and continued. "If I were only half so skilled at oratory as old Potitus here, I might be able to describe with accuracy what a single minute's torment was like in that sickbed. But alas, I am not so clever, so you will have to forgive your emperor for falling short on that score. It was an entire month, you see, in which I knew nothing other than the agonies reserved typically only for the lowest peons of Hades. My physician has told me that at some point my body temperature reached such heights that the vessel would have been better fit for stewing porridge than housing a soul. We chuckled lightly. In that time, I found myself cast adrift in a seemingly endless sea of malaise, populated always of malformed thoughts and obtuse dreams. A wretched Odysseus lost in his own inner world of dying. It was not until I witnessed there within the corpse that was me, a light so fragile, crystalline, and utterly absolute, that I began to know those things exclusive only to gods and lunatics. Suffice to say, I am different now. His face became strange, and he turned away from the congregation in silence for a time. The truth is, he said finally, faced the senators once more, I hate you all, or at least most of you, and am in pursuit now of fantastic and invisible things. He lifted then his insomniac's eyes to Elysium. Housed here within the walls of the Curia Julia is the cancer of Rome, and I mean to cut it out, squeal by squeal. The treason trial shall resume once more. The Senate House exploded then into a circus of outrage, into such a circus of outrage and insolence that the Emperor found himself more amused than angry to witness that spectacle of spittle that flew through the air like filthy wayward raindrops in hands that frenzied every which way as in the manner of the most enlightened monkeys. An unlikely champion burst up to his feet, the cadaver-like form of Bitilinus Bassus. This is an affront. The fleshy jowls of Bassus quivered with noble dignity. The very name of Tiberius ought to have been damned from memory, and you would bring back into practice his greatest sin? It is a curious thing that you of all men would speak to me of sin, Bassus. There have been some monstrous rumors going around about Tiberius as of late. With the things I've heard, I would have thought that you'd be quite fond of my grand uncle. Bassus recoiled, as if physically struck, and stammered out a string of half-word sounds like one speaking in tongues. Lord, I don't understand, blurted out Scribonius Proculus. We have seen you burn the trial documents, and the half of Rome bore witness to it. Pornography, the Emperor stated flatly. The man blinked slowly, shook his head, and blinked once more. Majesty? Those papers I had burned. He was smiling a little now. It was all pornography, the whole stack of it. Mount Priapus, I have taken to calling it. He burst then into a voracious fit of boyish laughter. The senators stared now at this youth of 25, who they were supposed to call master, howling wildly in their midst with his blood-stained toga, as the flies danced gleefully along to the music of his laughter, danced upon the corpse of one of their own. It was in his pallid, sickly grasp that he held their lives, and those aristocrats of Rome knew then a horror altogether new and unique, and belonging to them alone. I will not have it, cried the papery voice of Bassus once more. This scoundrel has violated the sanctity of this Congress with his flagrant disrespect, committed murder, and has spoken slander against me. He placed great emphasis on the last item. He looked all about him now, and addressed the entire senatorial body with the air of a general rallying the troops. These abuses have gone on long enough. Far too long have we allowed the folly of imperial rule to stain the cloth of our flag. To their gutters with empire, I say. Glory be to the Republic. "Well," the Emperor exclaimed with a fiery-eyed grin, "this fellow thinks he's Cicero. What will it be then, senators? Have the Ides of March come already?" He looked about him, gauging the will of the many hundred men who surrounded him. They conspired amongst themselves, and the Emperor could gather that the blood really was in some of them. But for every would-be Brutus, there was still a dozen others who would tear that rebel apart, if only to earn a scrap of favor. The Emperor smirked, assured. He waited for them to draw the same conclusion amongst themselves. "I had thought not," he concluded. "The die is cast," said the Emperor, addressing Bassus once more. "What has been said cannot be unsaid. I hereby charge you with—" ejaculated Bassus with venom, veins bulging out from his head as though each one were attempting escape. You upstart. You know not who you trifle with, boy king. A single drop of my blood is still greater than your entire vile line. I shall not stand idly by and stomach such outrage. I shall not. Caligula! Brabus! The Emperor cried in an explosion of rage. There entered then into the Curia Julia an olive-skinned figure of outrageous size and proportion, who permeated out from his every pore that crackling and oppressive air, accompanied always by men capable of sudden and terrible violence. Even being dressed as he was, all in Roman finery, with beard and hair well trimmed, there was no disguising his purpose. "By Hercules," remarked Bassus, despairing, that dog does not belong in this place." His sentiment was clearly shared by the great majority of the Senate House, who were making a very big show of covering their noses and wrinkling their already creased brows even further, as though a garum factory had just sprouted down the road. The gigantic man took his place obediently by the Emperor's side, and stared down at Bassus with flat, unblinking eyes that were not unlike those belonging to dead fish. The Emperor leaned one elbow upon the massive frame of his henchman and affectionately patted his shoulder like one does some trusty object. "Men of Rome, please do leave poor Barabbas alone. He's really had trouble enough. I myself made the order several months before to have him delivered from Judea after reading of a truly bizarre case penned by the governor there, a man called Pilate, if I recall correctly. As it turned out, noble Barabbas here had been grossly misrepresented and accused of some truly heinous acts, and is being held in prison. By chance, the Jewish Passover festival was going on, and at that time it was a tradition for a single prisoner to be set free on that day. The crowd was presented with two choices by the governor, Barabbas here, and another, a madman who thought himself to be a god. He smiled knowingly. You can see plainly who the crowd sided with. The other was crucified. This incident has reportedly caused quite a stir in that region, and the governor is rather reticent about the whole ordeal, so I elected to have Barabbas brought to Rome in order to get a first-hand account of what really happened that day in Judea. He has impressed me greatly since, owing largely to his sensitive and sophisticated nature. Barabbas proudly flashed a rotten yellow grin to the mortified Senate. "What Barabbas is most talented at, though," the Emperor said now, looking only at Bassus, "is the art of communication. Specifically, communicating how I feel." He nodded then to Barabbas, who advanced quickly upon the now screaming senator. Please, Cosby could have met. The plea was cut short when the swollen fist of Brabus crashed down upon the liver-spotted pate of Betulinus Bassus like the rock of Sisyphus. Scatterings of teeth leapt out from the red maw and danced across the floor like so many ivory nymphs at play. The small body went to slump down afterwards, but was granted no reprieve, as an upward strike crashed like lightning into the fragile ribs, with such unfettered ferocity that the whole figure of Bassus was lifted up into the air as though he were a puppet being yanked by its strings. A sharp sound, not unlike what is made when twigs are snapping underfoot, was heard all throughout the Senate House. Gibberings of agony arpeggioed into labored cries for help rendered inarticulate from that ruined orifice. Brabus grabbed the fallen senator about the nape of his neck and ripped the head up roughly. "Is it to be, Gag?" His voice was in audible putrefaction, each syllable of strangled Latin a victim of its own. The emperor thought for a moment. No. The giant turned and dragged along the bleeding old man without ceremony, and two disappeared outside the Senate House. Distant shrieking went on for some time, quieting down eventually into something like the whimpers of a dying animal. There were no noises in the Senate House except for these, and the emperor leaned his head into that din, savoring the intricacies as one does at the opera. It was amid the somber melody of killing that his mind crawled back inside itself, and he thought again of that strange old governor of Judea who was called Pontius Pilate, and of his report that was supposed to be about matters of state, but was full of feeling instead. The Emperor of Rome wondered, absently, if he truly could create heaven from blood, and if Pilate suffered from the same disease as he. Thank you all for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.